Welcome to Inclusive Expat. There's the version people talk about, and then there's the real one. And this is a show about immigration, family, and what actually happens when big systems interact with real lives. Today, I have my husband, Marcos, here, and we're going to talk about what it means to be kind of the go-to guy. When people find out that we moved to Spain, one of the first things that they say is, well, at least Marcos speaks Spanish. And that's true. He does. It was his first language. But what people don't know is that his relationship with Spanish is complicated, and that being the person in our family who speaks the language does not mean it's easy. It means he's the first in line for every hard conversation, every phone call, every bureaucratic nightmare. And he's doing all of that with an ADHD brain and deep sensitivity to getting things wrong. So today I want to talk to you, Marcos, about what it actually costs for you to be the one in our family that our family depends on for all of this. Welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be on.
So Spanish was your first language. Tell me about that. Where did you speak it? Who did you speak it with?
Yeah, so my parents met in a hospital, and my mom was a nurse. My dad was a doctor. My dad was from Dominican Republic, and he mostly only spoke Spanish with a little smattering of English just to get along. And then my mom spoke no Spanish. And so when they got together, language barriers was pretty tough. And my mom ended up learning Spanish before my dad learned English. And so in my household, for the most part, we spoke Spanish. Until later on, as my dad got more comfortable with English, he probably needed a little more for his business practice, things like that, his medical practice. So I think we started speaking a little more English. So a lot of the Spanish I learned was kind of intuitive Spanish. I do remember going on trips to school every day, and my dad would be like, all right, say the months, enero, febrero, marzo. I mean, every car trip was some sort of lesson we had to learn in Spanish that, of course, we all hated and were very resistant to. And so I say that kind of my language level is probably a pretty high vocabulary, but the grammar is, third grade grammar at best. And I'm really bad with, the genders of things, which my cousins have lots of fun making fun of me about. But, that's pretty much where I'm at.
So you mentioned your cousins making fun of your Spanish. What was that about?
Just oftentimes I would just mix up simple things like, instead of el perro, I'd say la perro. I'd just mix it up. So perro is always masculine, I would say feminine, and vice versa. And so they always just had a good laugh about it because it's something that one should know from an early age, but I just didn't always get it. And still, at the age of 55, I still struggle with it. I'm still okay, is it el café, la café? What am I asking for here? So I still struggle with it a bit.
So you never formally studied it, but you grew up speaking it at home. So where does that create gaps?
I mean, there's entire gaps of knowledge that I have no idea about. So casual conversation, I meet someone on the street, we can have a conversation about where are you from? What do you do? Those sort of things. That's easy. We did all that with family and friends, going to Dominican Republic quite a bit while I was a kid. There was a lot of family get-togethers and meeting people that we'd never met before. So all that's fairly easy. But then when it comes to how do I negotiate figuring out how to pay the electric bill? I don't know those words. If I got to go to the hospital, I'm okay, what is this word? I don't know. I don't know the words for kidneys or lungs or whatever. I mean, I kind of do, but it's a little more difficult. So there's lots of gaps in my knowledge where I'm very high elevated in some areas and very low in others. And specifically grammar is not my strong point.
Mm-hmm. So when we decided to move to Spain, was there any part of you that thought, oh, well, at least I speak the language? And has that played out the way you expected?
I don't know that it was a real big consideration. I mean, it probably should have been considered a little more. I probably didn't expect the level of need that my family was going to have for me to be there. Like just last week, I, ended up in a medical situation where I had to go and translate and talk to, doctors and people like that I wasn't prepared for. And I had to like literally, while the doctor's out of the room, like, all right, what does this word mean? What does this word mean? So I know what to say. So I find myself doing that a lot when I'm going to a situation. I'll be like, okay, like I know mostly how to talk, but let me get some keywords I'm going to need to know. So I'd say, again, the biggest part was just not really understanding how much my family would be dependent on me, being able to manage those hurdles, especially the bureaucratic hurdles of a country like Spain.
Mm-hmm. So that actually leads to my next question, which is tell me how the labor split works in our household now that we're in Spain. Who handles what and how did that happen?
I think it's still a work in progress. I think we're still figuring it out a bit. As my family, yourself and the kids start to learn a little more Spanish, it becomes easier. And sometimes I force you in these situations. So I'll be like, okay, we're going to this place and you're going to say it. I'm not going to say it. I'm going to sit back. And if you need help, I'll step in. But I need you to be able to search your Spanish. But as far as the division of labor, so to speak, I know that I'm in charge of a lot of the heavy lifting with Spanish as far as things would go bureaucratically. So it shifted a little bit. And I think it's still a work in progress. We're still kind of figuring it out.
Do you feel
I'm a
like that's
Libra, so I'm always about balance. I'm like, all right, like if I do this, like I need you to be here. Like we gotta we gotta balance it out.
you make a good point. Did you feel like we sat down and decided that, or did it just kind of become the pattern?
No, I don't think we decided. Like I said, I probably wasn't prepared. I should have been a little more prepared. We had made a prior move to Mexico before, and I felt like that transition was a lot easier. There wasn't a lot of bureaucratic tape to go through, but as this is more of a permanent move, there's a lot more involved. And Spain does happen to be a little more bureaucratic than Mexico. So I probably didn't consider it as much as I should have, but, I'm adapting. And, it's okay. It's a little stressful. I struggle with the phone. The hard part is the phone for me because one part of that I struggle with is I don't hear that well sometimes. And so in English, I'll pick up the gaps between the words and kind of my brain can like piece them together. But then when I'm in a language that I'm not as familiar with, and you might say a word that I don't know or like I'm trying to figure out, then my brain gets stuck on that one word. And then I've missed the 5 next words you've said. I might miss the gist of what you said because of one word I didn't get.
Yeah. But you're basically first in line for everything Spanish. So, government offices, phone calls, doctor's appointments, like you said. So, could you just speak a little bit more about what that feels like, sort of emotionally, not logistically?
I mean, it's stressful, especially in situations like medical situations, because I have a bad habit, and I'll just be honest about it. A bad habit from, when I was a kid. I didn't always understand what people said, so I would just be like, yeah, yeah, see. I would just nod and smile, right? And I didn't understand what they said, but I would just nod and smile, and most of the time people would just keep on going. That doesn't work in situations like this, where they might be asking a question and I'll be like, see, and they'll look at me like, wait, what? And I'll be like, oh, what did you say? And they'll repeat it again. And maybe the next time I'll be able to get it through. There's definitely a lot of added pressure there to get it right. And, there's no one but me to get it right. Sure, I'd say there's more pressure than I was probably expecting.
So, do you feel anything like in your body when that happens? Like, do you get a sense of dread or resistance, or what does that look like?
I would say I definitely dread getting on the phone. I don't want to get on the phone. Like I struggle. I don't want to get on the phone in the States because I might not hear things in the States. So anything that requires a phone call is something I don't want to do. So I'll resist and you'll have to pull me kicking and screaming to get it done because I'm just like, no, I don't want to do it. So I definitely probably, have that stress response when those sort of uncomfortable situations occur. So I would say, yeah, definitely can be stressful.
Hmm. And you've talked about your ADHD, you've talked about rejection sensitivity. When you make a mistake in Spanish or you say a wrong word or a grammar thing, what happens inside your head?
So it's something I'm actively working on. I've really taken some time to think about it and have just fairly recently, like within the past couple of weeks, have decided like I just don't care. Like, I have been very concerned about what if I say things the wrong way? Like, what if people look at me weird? What if, like, I say something dumb? And I've started to realize, like, I'm attempting to communicate here, and I might not get it perfect, but we can communicate. I've not found myself in a situation where we couldn't communicate. So, whatever, if I make mistakes, like, as long as the person is, understanding that I am putting that effort in, then they're going to be okay with it. That was hard for me at first because I do struggle with, like, I don't want to say anything unless I get it right. But then I've started to realize, again, fairly recently, that it's better to make that attempt and learn through that attempt. And maybe later, like, 100% this later, I'm like processing it. Well, that was a dumb thing to say. I probably should have said it like this, or probably should have said it like that. So my brain, focus on it for the next 2 days, right? But I made that
Oh,
attempt and we communicated. On the flip side of it, there is some joy, and I feel a little proud when I'm able to do these things, even though it
yeah.
was hard and even though, like, it wasn't comfortable, it was a little bit outside my comfort zone. I am succeeding. Like, there's not been an
Yeah.
instance other than the one coffee lady who was mean to me. Other than that, I'm mostly succeeding. And so, yeah, makes me orgulloso, makes me proud.
Well, in your defense, I do think the coffee lady understood you. She just
Oh,
was having a day.
I do.
I think you said something really profound, though, which was, I think we all relate to those 3 a.m. thoughts, no matter what your flavor of neurodiversity is, you go back and you overthink the situation and you think, oh, I could have done this better. I could have done that better. But that sense of accomplishment also of, hey, I did a thing, and I'm sure, I know I've experienced that just starting to learn Spanish. Every time I make myself understood, it's valuable. So it is really good to hear that a native speaker, since this was your first language, is also getting that sense of pride when you're getting it right. When you were struggling in the past to try to communicate the way that you want to, does the thought of your cousins ever come up? You ever hear them in your head?
No, I thought it was funny too, honestly. It didn't bother me. I had a good laugh about it. I wouldn't say I was necessarily self-conscious about it. I was like, yeah, so like that's something I'm not great at. Okay, like there's lots of other things I'm not great at. I also don't, I can't throw a football very well. So like, it's just one of those things. So no, I try not to focus on it too much.
So, as a Dominican heritage speaker in Spain, there are times when your Spanish is not wrong, it's just different. How have you felt about that?
Again, it's just like, okay, so it is different, but we can understand each other. You're saying vosotros, and I don't say that, but I did understand what you meant. You're basically saying y'all, right? And so, like, I get it, but it's just not something that we say in Latin American Spanish. I try not to concern myself with it too much. And to be honest, like, I'm proud of my Dominican heritage. While I do want to respect the country I'm in, like, we're still both speaking Spanish. And even though I'm primarily going to stay a Latin American style Spanish speaker, it doesn't mean we can't get along in Spain. Like, I'm going to say vale, just like you guys say vale. Like,
Vale,
we don't say
vale.
vale in Dominican, but like, we can say vale every other word while we're here. It's fine.
So, you brought up an interesting scenario, which I kind of want to dig into a little deeper, which is needing to go to the hospital.
Mhm.
Especially last week when Sam needed to go, and you were the one to handle the communication. Walk me through what was going through your head then.
I mean, to be honest, I was resistant at first to going. It is a new and uncomfortable situation. I'll be honest, like it's 50-50 whether someone is going to be able to, I'm going to be able to communicate well with them. Like, say, for instance, our a doctor's office where we go to normally. There's one of the receptionists who I really like, and I can understand most of the things she says. And the other one speaks 1,000 miles a minute. I'm just like, wait, what? Like my brain can't catch up, right? So part of it's that, right? You're kind of going into that unknown. Meanwhile, my friend Paco that I practiced Spanish with quite a bit, which is a lovely person, like he speaks a little slower. So I don't know if he's deliberately slowing down for me, but I don't think so. I think that's just the manner in which he speaks. So for me, I can understand one word out of 100 I don't get, but for the most part, it's fine. So there's that sort of thing. Like I'm putting myself in a situation where I almost feel like it's a 50-50 roll of the dice. Like, hey, I'm going to be able to communicate with you well. And I'm not, I'll be honest, like I'm not that comfortable saying, hey, could you, slow it down a little bit? Like we're not in a race here to get all
Mm,
the words out, right? Like I would say that part of any situation in Spanish is difficult for me. And then, of course, it's just language I don't know. Like, I'm starting to learn it, like an MRI is an RM, right? And so I'm
Mhm.
starting to learn the language a little bit around how it's communicated, but it's definitely not something, I've learned. So then it's kind of a more difficult situation. And I find myself, again, saying things wrong, getting things incorrect. But the people I'm talking to have been very kind and have just moved on and understood what I was trying to say, even though I might have said it wrong.
So you have these layers, if what I'm understanding right. You're thinking about and managing the language part, and then you're thinking about and managing the medical part. On top of that, often you have to advocate in a medical setting. And then you've got this sort of like asking for help layer that's coming in too. How are you walking through all of that at once?
It's a challenge. And you forgot, like the auditory issues where I just miss things,
Ah,
which is another layer, right? Which oftentimes is one of the most difficult layers because I'm always like, wait, what? What did you say? And I didn't quite get it. And then I find myself sometimes, and it happens in English too, where I didn't quite get it, but I'm processing in my mind. And then I've said what, but right as I'm saying what, my mind has pieced it together. And I finally got what you said, but it's because I'm processing it in the background. And if I probably waited another half a second, I probably would have been able to understand what you said. Oftentimes, I'm missing a word or two that I just didn't hear. Or like you kind of look at language as like a series of words, and if I stumble on one of those words, I might miss the next three words. And so it's a lot of that I find myself struggling with. So the different layers of trying to navigate through that is a challenge, and I find personality wise I'm not always that great for advocating for myself anyway. So then add on all those other things of a language, not, I wouldn't call it barrier, but a language stumbling block, auditory stumbling blocks. And then that kind of, difficulty of advocating or pushing back makes it a little challenging situation.
have you gotten any more comfortable telling people that you're hard of hearing, either in English or Spanish?
I don't necessarily say that I'm hard of hearing, but I mean, I've noticed that I will be like, wait, what? And I'll put my hand to my ear, which kind of a visual cue of, hey, I didn't quite hear you. And then they might repeat it a little louder. And that seemed to work, like for the most part. I've not had to say it. I find myself more in like, the intimate is the right word to use for it, but like more familial settings where sometimes with the kids, they'll say something and they'll say it again. And we're like, what? And then they might repeat things four times and I still didn't hear it. I'll just be like, all right, I didn't hear it. And I'll be like, wait, what did they say?
Saying you're hard of hearing is different than going like this because not hearing a word is a thing that happens to all people all the time. But being hard of hearing, to me, sharing that sets them up for inviting them to communicate with you in a little bit of a different way. I want to go back to something else you said, which is you don't really like to push back. You don't really like conflict. So take me then to being in the hospital, being there for your kid. You might have to push back. You might have to ask hard questions and demand things. So last week, you're in the hospital, you're with Sam and Theo. What do you do?
I mean, in the end, like you have to do what you have to do, right? Even though it's not the most comfortable thing in the world, I'm still going to do what I have to do to protect my family and do the things that are needed to be done. So in this instance, I phoned a friend. So I phoned Paco and brought him in. We're lucky that we have this amazing friend who is so willing to help out in any which way. And he really came to the hospital and helped advocate for us. So I was able to talk to him and get together with Sam and Paco and really kind of understand where we were medically and able to advocate for the right things for us. And, through Paco, we were able to get all the things we needed and also to understand a little bit of why we hadn't been able to get the things we needed in the past, where we had been, literally barking up the wrong tree, not understanding that what we were looking for was not up that tree, it was over here completely. And we just didn't know.
Yeah, yeah. So calling a friend and saying, I need help with this, for someone with rejection sensitivity, that is not a small thing. What made you do that instead of just trying to push through on your own?
So I didn't necessarily ask him to come. I asked him if he would call and see if he could talk to the doctor and find out what was going on, and what the next plan of treatment was. And he went above and beyond and came. The favor I asked felt like this, and then way he delivered was this and beyond, right? He delivered in ways I never would have expected. But back to me and how I felt about it. Um, again, a little hesitant at first, but then realizing like, we're kind of all in this together, and this is, someone who's already expressed, their family, both of them are amazing people, have already expressed their willingness in more ways than we can count of being there and being an advocate. So it was probably, a little less stressful than it normally would have been because of,
Mm,
these people we've met.
mm. So that asking for help seemed easier because you feel like you've already built a relationship of acknowledging and understanding that I know this person would want me to call and ask for help if I needed it.
Yeah,
Is that what you're
100%. I
saying?
mean, this is not, someone I just like a neighbor I've only met once, right? Like this is someone that I get to go out to coffee with once a week, and like, we get together, tell our life stories and really, bond on a pretty deep level. So, that connection felt like it wasn't, I mean, it was definitely a favor, like, don't get me wrong, but it didn't feel like it was something that was out of the bounds of our relationship. And like in the same
Mm.
situation, if I was able to do something like that for him, I would be there as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it really meant something to you that he came out to the hospital.
Yeah, 100%.
So I want to switch gears a little bit and get into sort of our partnership and what that looks like, how we work together. We've built this system where you're first in line for Spanish, but I'm first in line for English. And on the outside, seems efficient, but what does it feel like on the inside?
I mean, I will still say, like, it does put a level of pressure on me because it is, forcing myself into uncomfortable situations, right? There's always that sense of unknown. I mean, I guess I'm feeling better now. We're 7 months in. Again, other than the coffee lady, everything has gone fairly well. There've been a couple times we've been in the bureaucratic offices when we were first getting some things done, and I just didn't catch what they were putting down because, again, it's a whole new language that I didn't know. And it might have
Hmm.
taken us a couple times, and one amazing lady in this bureaucratic office that helped us. And without her, like, I don't know what would have happened and if we would have gotten it done. There's definitely some stress involved with encountering something, a little bit outside of your comfort zone. This is not something that I do every day, except now I do.
So, is there resentment? And I'm not asking you to put you on the spot. I think resentment can be normal when one person can't take on something that the other person has on their plate? So, talk about dealing with that, if you will.
I would probably say that we've gotten to a point now, bureaucratically wise and handling things, that it's a little less stressful. But there was a time there when there was a lot of, balls in the air that needed a lot of attention. That was pretty stressful for me, especially because, a little ADHD and like, stress of doing it in a second language, and then always feeling like I'm being asked to do, yet another thing and yet another thing and yet another thing. And so I wouldn't say it got to the level of resentment, but, there was a point there, within the first 3 months where it did get a little difficult, but I'd say we're past that now.
I will say, I know that you have the ability to accomplish those bureaucratic things in Spanish. Not every family has that. And we did hit a point where we were hitting a wall. And the only way for me to take it off your plate was to say, look, I'll pull this off your plate, I'll manage it. But that's going to include me hiring someone who's going to be able to go out and do that for us.
Yeah, so I did struggle with that, and we went to the office, and I couldn't get it done. It was one thing or another. This paperwork wasn't right. This other paperwork wasn't right. Then you did reach out, and it was expensive. And I was like, wait, why am I going to spend this kind of money? Like, I'm cheap. My Dominican father would be very excited. Like, why am I going to spend 300 euros to do this thing that I already just spent hours doing yesterday? So I was like, no, I'm going to do it myself. And so I went back the next day and got it done. So it was kind of like my cheapness over my reluctance.
Challenge accepted.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's just talk a little bit, last bit here about how having someone come to the hospital for you, that didn't happen by accident. That's because you built a relationship here. So talk to me a little bit about how you've approached making connections here.
So I tried to be a little more intentional. It's harder in the States where everyone seems like they're in their little bubble, and we live in this suburb, and it's to do anything I've gotten to get a car and go here or go there. And it feels like there is this instant connection that we get when people are, out of their norm. So this immigrant expat community, whatever you want to call it, there's that automatic connection that, we're a little bit of fish out of water here. And so I've tried to be a little more intentional about like, hey, let's set up coffee. Let's do this. Let's do this other thing. It does feel like Spain offers a lot of that because it's a great public transportation system. You can walk to many places. The distance to many of the people I connect with are, within 20 minutes if I wanted to walk. So we can meet in the middle and it's 10 minutes away. And that's really shortened the, effort involved in getting together. So that's been pretty great. I still feel like there is that difficulty of really connecting with the locals. That's a little difficult. We do have, like I said, Paco is from Valencia, so he is from here. And we've made friends with the, farmer system, that sort of thing. And we've met some people that have been here for 7 years, even though they're not local, but after 7 years, they're way more local than we are.
Mhm.
So I still feel like that connection to people in Spain that are from Spain would be something I would like to explore more. We're joining some sort of groups like, board gaming groups, which is a common interest. We might play with, people who are from here, or maybe I'll go to the chess club and play chess with someone who speaks Spanish and really try to connect with them and understand, who they are, where they're from, that sort of thing. So I think in many ways you have to be, you have to be intentional, but as an immigrant, it does give you an in to meeting people that you might not have done, where you're from. But be careful not to insulate yourself from, the culture and the people that are here, because we don't want to be those type of people who are just like, well, we're just going to be here. We're only going to speak English, and like we're going to be in our little bubble and try to pretend like we're going to, we're going to make America in Spain or the UK in Spain or anything like that. Like that's not something I want to be involved with. I really want to, become a part of this community in a positive way.
Mhm. Have you felt like making friendships here has been harder or easier than in the States? And does the language help or complicate things?
Definitely feel it's easier to connect with other expats, immigrants. Like I said, that first step of connections is already there. In the States, it might be like, okay, like we're going to connect because, maybe we like the same football team or something like that, and that's our step. But as immigrants, we already have that first connection already made. It's already there for you. And that's a pretty big thing. But from, meeting people who are local, it's a little more difficult. Who are in their home and trying to connect with them on their turf, so to speak, and making that heartfelt connection is something I'm definitely interested in making. But it is a little more difficult, especially I could probably get together with someone and be fine having an evening in Spanish, but then if we brought you into the mix, then you might struggle a little more. Like you'll understand a lot of it, but you'll struggle to communicate as well as I would. And so then that would put pressure on you. We've met people when we were in Mexico, like, well, I don't want to get to know them because they're not going to be here long. So there's definitely that. The best thing I could do is just be who I am, be genuine, and try to connect. And so maybe I try to connect with someone and they're not interested in connecting at the level that I want to connect with, but that's okay because I made that effort to make that genuine connection. And in the end, it's going to be worth it, even if that final connection ends up being less than I would want it to be.
So if someone is listening to this and they are, the Marcos in their family, they're the one who ends up first in line for all the hard stuff because they're the most capable, even when it costs them, what do you want them to hear?
I mean, sure, it can be stressful, sure, it can be difficult, but in the end run, you're doing what your family needs. And there's a lot of sense of joy and accomplishment in that. And so while it may be difficult and it may be a struggle at times, just remember why you're doing it, because you're doing it to help your family. Or maybe you're doing it to help your friends. Either
Mm,
way, in the end, it's worth it.
mm, mhm, mhm. Has your relationship with Spanish changed since you've been here? Like, has using it every day shifted anything about how it feels for you?
Well, sure, it's definitely more comfortable now, because back when we lived in the States, I might go months without speaking Spanish. Or, I could call my dad and we could speak in Spanish. But being able to speak it every day has strengthened that muscle per se. And of course,
Mm.
getting that level where I'm at now, where I'm just like, I'm just going to speak it. And if it's wrong, it's wrong. Is going to help me as well, I believe.
Anything you want to say that I didn't ask about?
No, I just feel like, this experience can definitely, broaden your horizons, make you stronger as a person, even though there can be challenges. Nothing worth having in life is free. So those things that we overcome can actually be the things that we're going to remember the most. Like, hey, I did that thing. So
Yeah.
I would say just go for it.
Well, I really appreciate you, and I appreciate you talking so openly. I've been married to this man for 20 years, and I learned something recording this episode. I knew the Spanish stuff was hard for him, and I didn't fully understand why. So, if you're doing this with a partner, have this conversation, not on a podcast, but just at your kitchen table. Ask them what they're carrying that you can't see. If this episode meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. If you're a neurodivergent person or family living abroad, or even thinking about it, we'd love to hear your story. You can find us on Instagram at Inclusive Expat or email us at inclusiveexpat@gmail.com. Thanks for being here. We'll talk soon.